Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Mader.
But what's more impressive to me about the
Chase
fact
Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase. Get him, Chase.
And Adam.
No, not necessarily, but it's the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Yeah, buddy. It's time for another edition of Operation Domination. Thanks for tuning in live on the YouTube channel, Fantasy Football Advice Network at FF Advice. We're also live on X and on Facebook too. Make sure you hit us up on your favorite podcast app by downloading Operation Domination. Wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave a comment, review, download, subscribe, all those great things. I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined here with my only partner in crime for right now. We'll see if we get the other guys in later, but we got Mr. Chris Dowhower in the building. Chris, how you doing? And what are we talking about tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, Dan. I'm trying to get myself excited about the schedule. We're getting to that part of the season right now where we're not into the training camps yet, but we're not really, out of the off season yet. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into tonight. And we're going to have a special edition of our offensive observations in this off season edition. So it's going to be a show long segment that we are going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of what scores points, Dan, but also making our points.
I love it. It's going to be fire all the way through. Don't worry, we're going to have Adam in just a few minutes, but yes, it's time. It's time to do it, Chris. So let's go ahead and hit our very first segment on the board.
Tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances.
The Festivus for the rest of us. Gotta love that episode, actually.
One of the best ever, isn't it not? But Dan, sometimes on offense, you got to air it out to score points. And in this case, we're going to air something out. So we're airing our grievances out. We're going to talk about some of the things from last season and this off season that we need to get off our chest or bring to your attention. So let's go ahead and get started. And we'll start off with some of the things that, we have to get off our chest or express our dissatisfaction or just let them know how much disappointed us last season, I should say.
Absolutely. So what's the first category?
Or what we're looking back at the last season. Then we want to close out this last season and get into the new season when you were getting that old, dirty juju off us, and who needs to be shamed as we push forward into this new season.
So this one was a bittersweet area for me going into last year. I was so big on Garrett Wilson. Going into last season, I had him as a wide receiver 6, one of the highest people in Fantasy Pros who ranked him there. Very excited, right? Primed for a second-year breakout. Nobody else to share the targets with. Supposed to have gotten the upgrade at the quarterback position in Aaron Rodgers, and of course, he goes down in 4 snaps, and the rest kind of lived in history. But in a way, I don't want to come down on it too hard because, as frustrating as it was, as many shares that I had of Garrett Wilson, in a way, I was vindicated. Garrett Wilson was 4th in targets amongst wide receivers, had 100 receptions last season. The problem was he had 6.2 yards per target. That was the second lowest mark amongst all receivers with 100 receptions or 100 targets or more. And of course, combine that with the lack of touchdowns because the Jets offense didn't score period last season. It dragged Garrett Wilson all the way down, the wide receiver 39 on a points per game basis in half-point PPR leagues. So that left a very, very sour taste in my mouth. And that was the big depressing thing about last season for me because I was so big on Garrett Wilson and I was right, but I wasn't right at the same time.
That's a tough one when you feel like you got it, but it just slips out of your hands. And Aaron Rodgers didn't help that case at all. Yeah, for myself, Dan, I'm going to go with, I was disappointed in the scoring. We didn't have a lot of scoring last year. I was disappointed in some of the offensive play, and we're talking about offenses. But overall, this guy has been an offensive genius, returning to the game, going to, bring back the Denver Broncos to prominence. Sean Payton, I have a grievance with you. I cannot believe you spent a year off doing what and learning what this offseason or the past season to bring to that Denver offense. We watched Russell Wilson, I guess, had okay stats. I know fantasy-wise he did okay, which is a fantasy show. But, oh, my God, it was painful to watch. We watched the Bronco team on top of it that was supposed to be competitive, Dan. They didn't really accomplish. They didn't go to playoffs. They weren't competitive for most of the season. And on top of it, they didn't want to play any of the rookies. They didn't play any of their own players. Marvin Mims goes out there and has a great game. Well, to the bench you go, buddy. Sean Payton, I don't know what happened to you, but my grievance from last season, I hope it changes this season. I was hoping to get more better coaches into this offensive game and get excited, but man, it was painful last year.
You're preaching to the choir on this one. You're not going to get an argument out of me. I'm the one guy sitting here saying that I still believe when it's all said and done, and maybe it's a bold take at this point, I don't know, I don't care, that Justin Fields is going to be the starter week 1 because I believe Russell Wilson is cooked based on what we witnessed playing on the field last year. His stats, I mean, Chris, you like to make this comparison all the time. What's the difference between his stats and when Carson Wentz got borderline run out of the league when he left the Indianapolis Colts? It was basically the same thing, but it looked like horrible football. Why do people think just because he's getting paid $1 million on a contract, why do people think Russell Wilson is still a top-notch quarterback? He is not. That offense was in the bottom third in expected passing. Sean Payton did everything he could in the book to make it as simple and conservative and safe as possible, a la Javonte Williams, who's still coming off of a multi-ligament knee injury, falling forward for 3 yards every first and second down, and that's all we could witness because, God forbid, you put the ball in Russell Wilson's hands. He wouldn't even do it until the fourth quarter, and they were down by a couple of scores. So all of this backs it up. Russell Wilson, I don't care about the stats. Sean Payton did his darndest to make sure he couldn't ruin anything. But then to your point, we go back to the Sean Payton side. And when you go and draft a guy like Bo Nix, who's known in college for just being a check down maestro, it feels like nothing's going to change. I mean, I look at Bo Nix, I look at his actual draft grade, where he should have actually been taken, not in the first round. I don't know what the difference between him and a Jarrett Stidham is. What's the difference other than draft capital now? You're 100% preaching to the choir on that one.
Yeah, Dan, I'm just, for me, we always like to clamor up the show about how important coaching is. And when you have a guy who's supposed to be an offensive genius and you watched the offense Denver play last year, it just does not match up.
What about this comment we got coming in from Rockstar Rips here? He's advocating on Russell Wilson's behalf here. Clearly a Steelers fan. Sean Payton wasn't worried about Russ. He tried to get him waived for no injury clause. Russ stunk. If he actually played well, they wouldn't be trying to ride him out of town. And here's another hint for you. No team pays a quarterback or any player $40 million to play against them. Nobody does that in the NFL. This is not baseball. So if you think he actually wasn't worried about Russ, you missed what happened last year completely. That's my take. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I don't disagree. Look, I mean, Russ had decent stats like we talked about, but they did everything in their power to hide him. And like I said, I do put a lot on Sean Payton as well. He's got to take some onus. You got to play players who are productive, and he was refusing to do that. He was looking for ways not to score points. It felt like it was painful, like I said, watching on the offense last year. And Russ, I don't think he has a whole lot in the tank. But as a Steelers fan, look, Dan, we got to give them up. We got to throw them a bone. They've had a total of 10 touchdown passes at the quarterback position the last 2 years.
You guys.
So it could look awesome to them.
That's what happens when you don't have Kenny Pickett around anymore. Oh, man. Chris, what was our next topic here?
So you kind of dove into our topic because I talked about my coach that I disappointed from last season. But coaching hires, Dan, let's look back at the offseason. We just started off this kind of movement to this new season. It starts with the coaches. What was something from the coaching hiring that stands out to you that you need to share your grievance with?
Yeah, so this one, I'm incredibly disappointed with the Washington Commanders. I was a little bit hopeful here that new ownership, maybe a new organizational direction, and it feels like they kind of just doubled down on what we just seen for the last few years. I mean, you brought in Ron Rivera as a defensive coach who was already a retread, and you just followed that up with new ownership and did the exact same thing with Dan Quinn, a retread, defensive-minded head coach, when you're taking him and bringing him in at a time in which you knew you were going to be in position to draft a franchise quarterback. Now you can say all you want, like, well, we're bringing in Cliff Kingsbury to be an offensive coordinator because that went so well in Arizona. That was such a prolific thing. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, it's going to be a different conversation when it comes to Jaden Daniels. But if we're looking at this just from like an NFL coaching move, I'm just very disappointed when it comes to the Washington Commanders because this feels like more of the same when it was supposed to be different.
Yeah, you got Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. You got weapons in this offense. You were hoping to see kind of unleashed the creative mind, head coach. But what we might see a lot of point scores against this defense because last time we saw Dan Quinn on the sidelines, he was getting blown out by Green Bay in the playoffs. So for myself, the coaching thing that stood out to me, Dan, is you're talking about building culture, getting excited. You know, I was so excited for the Raiders. They bring in a coach who I feel like epitomizes what they are. Antonio Pierce was a fantastic hiring. But the part that just kind of just took the air out of me was watching them hire Luke Getsy. This guy could not be less creative than what we saw in Atlanta with Arthur Smith or what we saw in Pittsburgh. Sorry, Pittsburgh fans, again, I'm not trying to shit all over you, but it's just the offense was pathetic most of that year last year, watching Matt Canada. But even Matt Canada might have emotion, might do something once in a while, Dan. Luke Getsy as a Raider offensive coordinator, that took the wind out of my sails, and I was disappointed in the Raiders in that move.
I mean, the only silver lining, I guess, is that, of course, he has the history there with Devontae Adams. That's the only thing you kind of point to as to why that might be the case. And I would say, well, you don't have a running quarterback. You have a different type of quarterback. Maybe the system's a little bit different. But when you walk away, unfortunately for them, with nobody in the draft to show for it, and it's Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, who are, again, talk about Denver having the same quarterback. Raiders really have the same quarterback and two guys there. I don't think it can be prolific, even if you were Sean McVay necessarily. So that's where it kind of just throws everything in a cold bucket of water for me, where fantasy wise, I look at that situation, it's going to be all about just volume. I know Adams is going to get volume. I know Zamir White's going to get volume, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be creative. It's not necessarily going to be efficient. It's not necessarily going to be a top 15 scoring offense. So ultimately ceilings are going to be limited, and Luke Getsy does nothing for you. I agree with you there. And I don't know philosophically if he actually fits Antonio Pierce too. So yeah, I tend to agree with that one. Wasn't super thrilled about that either.
Yeah, and then just to kind of tap it off for me is, when you look at what he kind of does, this guy, didn't want to utilize Justin Fields' legs. Not that they have those kind of legs in the Raiders of quarterback play, but you want a guy who's going to try to put you in position to succeed. Raiders have offensive players. If you give me Devontae Adams and you give me Brock Bowers and you give me some of Jordan, Jacoby Myers, this isn't a team lacking weapons in a sense. And I understand the quarterbacks aren't necessarily exciting, but you watch Jake Browning be able to move the ball pretty consistently. Watch Nick Mullins move the ball in Minnesota, for God's sake. Like, if you have weapons, you can actually push the ball, move the ball if you have a decent coordinator or a guy who's just at the the offensive coordinator side.
Yeah, but you're an offensive mind in the 21st century. Chris, real quick, I like this comment coming in from Dynasty World Fantasy Football, and thanks for tuning in, by the way. He was disappointed with the Cowboys signed McCarthy in the first place, so was I, and then even more disappointed that they decided to keep him. The only silver lining I can offer you, Dynasty World Fantasy Football, is that I know we made a big deal about the Cowboys having a good draft, but all in all, their offseason was still terrible. They did not improve their team from a season ago. It's a very good chance this team is set up to do similar things to what they did last year, a la lose in the first round of playoffs, because they're not actually that physical. They're not built to do that. They lose Dan Quinn, so we'll see if that defense is even as good as it was a season ago. Very good chance, I think, that Mike McCarthy's not going to be there. So shout out to our comment there from Dynasty World Fantasy Football. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm going to defend Mike McCarthy a little bit too. Look, he wasn't the problem for this Cowboy team. Dak Prescott had his best season in a long time. This offense was actually pretty efficient for the firepower of just having basically CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson. So I can't put it all on the coach. What I can say is, Dan Quinn didn't do a great job getting up 40-something points for that Green Bay offense. That helped. That hurt. And I think that there was some moves that Dallas could have made. I would love to see them make a better upgrade. I'm not going to argue that at all. But I don't think Mike McCarthy necessarily is a problem. And Mike Zimmer wasn't a bad defensive hire, I think, overall to replace Dan Quinn either.
All right, yeah. We'll see.
Look, I feel like Dallas is the same situation where the Eagles are in a sense where I get the venom, but at least the assistant coaches could be something to help us.
I actually like that comparison from the standpoint of I think there's a similar situation where if the Eagles flop in the second half or if they have an early exit, we're going to see Nick Sirianni gone too. So I think they are in a similar situation. It's a good comparison where depending on how things go, we might be looking at two different coaches at the top of the NFC East next year. Very interesting. Go ahead.
All right, Dan. So moving on to the next part of offseason, usually we get into the free agency and the trade parts. So what is some free agent moves and trades, these transactions that you see these teams make, or a player that moves it stands out to you that you just have to let them know your agreements with?
So this is a funny idea to think about when, we do fantasy football the way that we do. And you're always, I feel like from a fantasy football perspective, for the most part, the industry is like this too. You're looking for the silver lining in any given move because it had to benefit somebody. Maybe it didn't work out for this guy, but this guy benefited kind of deal. You're looking for that. So it was interesting to kind of check it out from a standpoint of, all right, what was a move that helped nothing? And I don't know if this necessarily didn't help anything, but Gabe Davis going to the Jaguars was super disappointing to me for Gabe Davis and frankly, for the Jaguars, because on the Jaguars side of things, I don't think Gabe Davis gives you anything different than what you had in Zay Jones, who you just cut, or, certainly doesn't improve the Calvin Ridley situation. I think what Calvin Ridley did last year is what you would hope to get out of Gabe Davis this season. And then for Gabe Davis, I don't think this is a situation that unlocks him in any kind of capacity. I mean, maybe the ship has sailed. I know some people are going to say who've been burnt the last couple of years by him. Like, who cares? Move off of Gabe Davis. I get it. I understand what you're coming from. But I wanted to see the guy go somewhere where he might be utilized as more than just a cardio treadmill ex-perimeter receiver. That changes not at all now going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's all he's going to be used as. So I felt like this helped nothing. Of course, like I said, always looking for the silver lining. Silver lining on the flip side is, your Dalton Kincaid guy, he's going to get all kinds of target share. Keon Coleman now gets drafted there. I'm sure we'll get to that throughout the summertime. But as far as Gabe Davis and Jacksonville Jaguars go, this helped nothing at all. It doesn't help Trevor Lawrence any kind of way either. So I was down on that one.
Yeah, so you talk about helping nothing at all. The Carolina Panthers spent a lot of money. They made a huge trade getting rid of their defensive end and trading him to the Giants. And this team has improved around Bryce Young, where and how. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the interior offensive line, and yet they're going to have Austin Corbett as their center, who sucks. And they're going to have two guards who Robert Hunt has some talent, but Robert Hunt was a guy who scored as a pass protector, one of the lower things in PFF, mid-range, average, below average. And the other guy is way below average. And Lewis, I don't know what this team was doing. Seattle was more than willing to give her that guard. They were looking to upgrade somebody, and they went out and gave him big time money. This isn't going to help Bryce Young get any better. This isn't going to make your number one pick look any better. I have no clue what they're doing when it comes to making their moves. And trading Burns to the Giants, now you have no pass rusher, and you really did what with those picks?
I mean, we can make the argument about Brian Burns and stuff like that. I'll push back slightly on this one. First of all, it wasn't a high bar. Almost anything you brought in would be a little bit of improvement on the offensive line for Carolina. Rob Hunt is an improvement upon what that offensive line had a season ago. And I will say this, bringing Deontay Johnson, that shouldn't be overlooked. That is an upgrade at the wide receiver position, 100%. Drafting Jatavian Sanders, even though he's a rookie tight end, is an upgrade over Hirsch, who couldn't give you anything and had concussion issues and head issues. Drafting Jonathan Brooks, as much as I hated the fact that he wound up in Carolina, is an improvement over the running backs that you had there. And I do think Dave Canales is an improvement of a play caller over the combination of Frank Reich and Thomas Brown from a season ago. So there are a number of ways where I do look at Carolina and say, I think they have improved. Now, Chris, to your point, do I think it matters? No, but that's also because I recognize Bryce Young's not really an NFL starting quarterback. So that's the part where I don't know if it matters. But I do think there's a number of ways in which they did improve from a season ago.
Here's where I feel like you had a left tackle in Kawa who shouldn't play left tackle. And if you wanted to improve your interior line, slide him into guard because he'd be a stud at guard. And when you look at the draft picks that they had, there's quite a few guys in those second and third rounds that they could have added an interior lineman, spent a lot less money, and been able to acquire one of these big-time receivers who are going to want $30 million moving forward. Instead, you spent your draft capital moving up and sliding around from the draft yet, but you didn't really put this position where you maximize what Bryce Young's going to bring to your table with that contract we always talk about, rookie contract. Oh, the quarterback rookie contract. Well, what are you going to put around him in the next 3 years? It's not going to make the situation any better. Maybe there's Deontay Johnson was a brilliant move. Pittsburgh, I don't know what you were thinking other than you Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator. So why bother having a receiver? But besides that move, with all the draft capital they had and all the money that they had, and in a situation where you already blew a pick trying to get Bryce Young, you got to make this guy look good. There's a lot of different ways I think they could have spent their money and been a hell of a lot better, and including in defense where you don't have to put so much pressure on the offensive score points. I'm not going to, the draft picks weren't that bad, but Brooks, a guy who's coming off with ACL injury, is really going to bring anything different that Chuba Hubbard was bringing to you. Then you have another receiver. I think Deion Johnson was great, but we're having Jonathan Mingo Part 2 and Xavier Leggett. Like, I just don't see what we're looking for Bryce Young to get better. If you want Bryce Young to be better, get him stud receivers, because that's how you make a quarterback, the guy that he just was coaching before, Baker Mayfield, look good. Look how it was with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Look what it looks like without those guys. So to me, that's where we're going to see what Bryce Young's really going to look like, and if that's money really was worth spending.
Sure.
All right. So while we're getting, talking about the draft, what are some things that stood out to you in the draft? You kind of shared your point of Carolina, like some of the things that they did, but who should get your scorn, during the draft season part?
Well, you kind of stole this a little bit earlier, but it was Bo Nix at number 12. I kind of purposely passed on bringing up the Michael Penix thing. We've talked about it on the show. It's been talked ad nauseum. That was all the reaction. To me, Bo Nix is almost worse because, well, at least with the Falcons, they have Kirk Cousins. They're set up. I think Michael Penix actually is a good quarterback if Kirk Cousins is not able to go. Bo Nix is not a first-round talent, guys. I don't know how else to break this down to you. He was in college for freaking ever for a reason, because he knew it was never going to go higher than the third round of the draft. Somehow this year he winds up going, gets jacked up to the first round because everybody was just desperate at the quarterback position and had the cutoff there and got swept up in the hype. I mean, he improved his game in Oregon from what he was in Auburn. Yes, he did. Yes, he is a processor, but you shouldn't be chasing Brock Purdy in the first round. Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant for a reason. And I feel like that's what they did. They chased Brock Purdy in the first round. This means I know what kind of offense you're going to be. It's a game management, conservative type of offense. It's not going to be high flying. It's going to be in the bottom tier of scoring. And as a result of this, I think you're going to be looking at yet another bust. The Broncos have never in their history drafted a franchise quarterback. Remember, the Broncos did not draft John Elway, people. They have not drafted a franchise quarterback that was ever successful in their history. I don't think that changed, and you just spent your 12th pick capital on this guy, a team that doesn't have a lot of draft picks to begin with because of what they gave up for Russell Wilson, who then ran him out of town to pay him $40 million on top of it. So I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I just have to pound Bo Nix in the first round of the Broncos. Really, really not a good look.
I think that's an excellent one. The Broncos are just not looking good for us in our opinions. We're not very keen on what they've done this offseason and last season. Is there another question here, Dan?
Oh, we got a comment coming in from Tyler Bradley. Troy Franklin was the real get for Denver. That might be true because he actually did come in at good value, but I don't know if he does have the chemistry of Bo Nix. I get all that, but it doesn't really matter if it's going to be right next to the line of scrimmage in the NFL. It's not the same as college. You can't just rip that ball off and go against the Pac-10 corners. So we'll see what happens.
You better be careful too, Dan. If he has a good game, he probably gets benched for a while in Sean Payton's place as well. So it starts to
Second Marvin Mims took one to the house. You're on the bench. You're on the bench. It's too good for us. What was yours?
So for mine, Dan, it was kind of a similar thing in the quarterback situation. I understand they get a quarterback, but the draft capital they just spent in general this draft was just ridiculous to me. The Minnesota Vikings, I don't know what you had to do. Look, Dallas Turner better turn into a superstar because you basically gave up the draft capital that you're going to get a quarterback, and then you got Jason McCarthy, who I just don't see being the answer for your offense. I know I talked about offense, coaches being great and how they can really bring, average to below average players to up speed with a good offense and good surroundings, but I just do not like this move moving forward. I think the Vikings could have done much more with the draft capital they had. They spent a lot of picks, and they're not going to have an easy time getting better next year. They spent a lot of money in free agency on defensive players, so things better work out real well because moving next season, you got no picks, and you don't have a lot of cap space. So I'm not big on what Minnesota did the draft.
No, I don't think any of us are. We can welcome in now Adam LaRue. What's up, buddy? Way to join the show.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was a fun little time, I guess. Yeah, the internet's been cutting out on me. I finished up my workout and was like, all right, let me hop on the pod. And then nope. Not up. But hey, made it in. Get to talk some football. Let's go.
Let's do it. Chris, why don't we move on to the next section and get Adam kicked off here?
All right. So now we finished our grievances. Dan, it's time for us to talk about some of the things that brought us gratification. That brought that shit-eating grins off our faces. When we roll over, we have a cigarette. You feel so good about it. So what's some of the things that really make you feel good about last season?
What makes me feel good about last season?
Like, what's something that really stands out to you that you feel satisfied? Like, you know what? I found gratification, something from last season.
Oh, I got a great one for you. And I'm writing an article actually about this, and I'm going to be pissing off all of New York, especially Giants fans. Felt very, very validated in Daniel Jones. And look, I'm not talking about the ACL injury. Obviously, we're not wishing injury on anybody, and I wasn't anticipating nor calling for him to get injured as part of my analysis as to why I thought he was going to disappoint, both from a fantasy standpoint and from a guy who got signed $40 million for absolutely no reason. Let's take the first look at the first 5 weeks, shall we? His 17 game, or in other words, a full season pace over his first 5 weeks when the guy was still healthy would have been 7 passing touchdowns and 20 interceptions. Oh, and just 3,000 yards too, by the way. I mean, just awful stuff. Now, is it a bad offensive line? Yeah, one of the worst in football. Did he have weapons? No, not necessarily. But you knew that what you were signing up for when you were Daniel Jones in the freaking first place. And all of a sudden, we've seen now, it's not just because of the injury. The Giants have shown that they have buyer's remorse when it comes to Daniel Jones. Hence, how much they tried to give up to the New England Patriots to go ahead and get Drake May. Now, why they wouldn't just take like what Denver did, take one of the quarterbacks that felt he was available, a la a Michael Penix or something like that. I don't know. That's an organizational thing. But I felt very gratified after having to listen to how Daniel Jones, who only threw 15 passing touchdowns the year before, somehow deserved $40 million, and to see him get off to that start proved otherwise. And now the Giants are just begging for the season to be over so they can finally move on from their quarterback position. So maybe a little negatory, but I felt very satisfied with the results.
Yeah, anybody who makes Tommy DeVito look like a quarterback that's better, like somehow that you have to be shamed. Like, I'm sorry, absolutely right, Dan. And when Tyrod Taylor played the offense for them, all the weapons, all the things that were wrong with that offense, Tyrod actually looked pretty good. So Daniel Jones, yeah, PU. Adam, let's get to you. What's from last season something that you just find satisfying or gratification in?
Yeah, last season was a fantastic time to be a Lamar Jackson truther. I know he got his MVP kind of in just a down year for offense and the position in general. Like, I get it. It wasn't like a super competitive MVP race, but a lot of people were being very down on Lamar Jackson. Just like the sophomore MVP was a fluke. He's not one of the elite guys in the position. And when a lot of guys weren't necessarily like winning their team games, he was a driving force. He was a big part of the identity of the Ravens offense. And obviously their defense was really good as well. One of the best in the league. And that was a big part of them being a successful team. But he's an identity driver for that offense. He was very fun to watch last season. And did it in, I think, unique ways. Obviously he was using his legs, but it wasn't like, the crazy gashes that we've kind of seen in the past either. It was some passing, some running, kind of a mix. I was really happy with it to see him get another MVP.
So it was good he didn't convert to receiver. I'm taking it, Adam, in your opinion.
I appreciate Bill Polian for a lot of things, but his quarterback opinions past, say, 2010 aren't really something I care too much about.
I always forget that goes back to Bill Polian for some reason. I forget.
I can't.
I know you can. As a Colts fan, you cannot. But I always forget about that. It's crazy.
It brings a grin to my face, and I find gratification. And this is something that all three of us can share, I think, and that we told you about C.J. Stroud over and over and over again. And we told you about Bryce Young over and over and over again. And surprise, look how it unfolded. We listened to so much about C.J. Stroud. The Ohio State offense, he's got all his weapons. What's he going to do? That guy took Nico Collins and made Nico Collins one of the best fantasy guys you could have on your roster right now. Nico Collins, who we were just like, who's Nico Collins? Who cares? Tank Dell, I think, is a fantastic player, but hit the ground running like he was Deshaun Jackson out there last year. We watched Noah Brown have 200-yard games almost. So when we talk about a guy who maybe the athleticism is not such a problem, maybe playing from the pocket isn't something that we have to get knocked against all the time. Maybe these things that you guys do when you try to test how someone reads a defense is where they have the ability or capacity to play football and process things. Maybe it doesn't mean crap. Because I know CJ Stroud went out there and balled. And I listened all off season about how Bryce Young was so great and he did nothing. While CJ Stroud took a Houston Texan team that nobody's picking to go anywhere and made him somebody relevant.
Yeah, I just want to add to that real quick too. Just from a fantasy standpoint, 100% with you on that one. We were both on CJ. I think all three of us actually were on CJ Stroud last year over Bryce Young, and he did incredible things, especially for a rookie. But I want to slide this in here because I was having this conversation with somebody else before. CJ Stroud being drafted as a top 5 quarterback right now is a little nutty. It is hard for pocket passers, generally speaking, to get into the top 5 unless you're going to throw about 34, 33 passing touchdowns at minimum. Now, and I want to point out that he still only threw 22 as a rookie last year. Last year was the worst scoring out of the top 10 quarterbacks as a whole we've seen since 2017. And that's why you saw some of these guys like the CJ Strouds, like the Brock Purdy's, the guys who necessarily weren't putting up high prolific numbers, but were better than most last season as pocket passers, sneak into the top 10 last year. I don't want people to think that's going to repeat this season. This comes into play with CJ Stroud, comes into play with guys like Jordan Love. So I just want to point that out there, that unless we think CJ Stroud, and he might with the weapons that he has, I'm not saying it's impossible, but unless he's going to go out there and drop 34, 35 passing touchdowns, there is a very low probability he's going to come back and return quarterback 5 overall talent. So I just want to point that out there as we start to get into draft season. But yeah, we were 100% on CJ Stroud last year.
I will give him, Dan, Stephon Diggs is a hell of an upgrade from Noah Brown.
Yeah, no, like I said, he does have the weapons. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be at his ceiling. That's all I'm pointing out there. Go ahead.
All right, so we're going to move, on to something else that brought us some joy. What was some things that brought you joy from the free agency trades or, just transactions that kind of happened during that time frame?
So the free agency trades for me, Derrick Henry, I don't know if there was a player this entire free agency that fell into a more perfect fit than Derrick Henry. I mean, I feel like we will go back to like the 2019, 2018 days where we thought to ourselves, what if Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson played on the same team? Like that was like a fantasy of a fantasy. And I know Derrick Henry's a little bit older, but now we finally get to see it. And just because he's a little bit older does not mean he can't still be a similar like Derrick Henry. His efficiency did not fall off a cliff. He still had 4.2 yards to carry last year, 4.5 yards per touch. He still had a broken tackle per 12 carries last season. That was still one of the best in the NFL as far as the running back situation is concerned. He's still a tank. Lamar Jackson, the great thing about him as a scrambling quarterback is that he doesn't take away touchdowns from the running back position. He doesn't usually run for a ton of touchdowns. We saw Gus Edwards go for 13 touchdowns last year. And this year, Derrick Henry, unlike a Gus Edwards or what we've seen over the Ravens for the past 5 years, is not going to be sitting there splitting with anybody of note in that backfield, especially in those money situations. So Derrick Henry, I think, has a real chance, and I have him ranked right now as my RB8 overall because of the fit that he put himself into. And right now, ADP, he's going like back in second round, early third round. He's much more valuable than that, and this was the perfect situation in this free agency. So Derrick Henry, Baltimore Ravens, that was definitely mine.
Like it. Adam, how about you?
I mean, let's talk about another running back. And Dan, this kind of in multiple ways goes back to what you've said. Saquon Barkley getting off the Giants was awesome because we talked about Derrick Henry. I have Jonathan Taylor. There's only a handful of workhorse running backs left. It's a dying breed. They just don't come around that often. Now we have Bijan Robinson, but I mean, he's the last one to come out since like the 2017, like really great class. There was a gap where we weren't getting any like workhorse running backs. So to get one and, maybe it's kind of towards the tail end. He's been hurt quite a bit, but still looks really good when he's healthy. Like to at least get a couple years where he's not being wasted by such a bad team. I am really excited to at least just see him in somewhere that can be really relevant. It would be way cooler if Jason Kelsey was the center still, but it's still going to be pretty awesome. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, thank God, no more Boston Scott. Yes, I'm excited too, Adam. Saquon Barkley to Philadelphia, hell of a move. For myself, when I look at some of those moves made, Marquise Brown brings that shit eating green smell out to my face. This picturing him in a Chiefs uniform actually being utilized. Dan, you talked about Gabe Davis and what is that going to do for Jacksonville? And Gabe Davis having hope maybe still could find something. Marquise Brown was a guy who's getting destined to just be, pigeonholed as a one-trick pony and turn into Marquise, Godwin moving forward. But instead, we're going to see him actually have a chance to show you his skill set with a Patrick Mahomes. And thank God Patrick Mahomes has a really legit speed threat and guy who can make plays, not MVS, not Justin Watson, not Cardonius Toney, who's on IR every other week, but an actual guy that can, take the top off and make plays underneath. I am super excited to see Patrick Mahomes and Marquise Brown this offseason, a match made in heaven with Andy Reid as the head coach.
His target shares might get a hell of a lot greater because God knows what this Rashee Rice suspension is going to look like now. Sure. Things just seemingly get worse for him in the media. Oh, my gosh. So, yeah, like that one. Good.
So we skipped over a little thing, but let's go back to coaching. What coaching hires or moves or things that happen during the coaching cycle that bring smiles or gratification to you? Start off with you, Adam.
Yeah, I'm just happy Arthur Smith is no longer the head coach of.
No, hallelujah, Dan. We didn't hallelujah on that one. I think yes.
I
testify, Adam.
It would have been insane. It would have been insane. But you can realistically think that. All right, the record wasn't that bad, and he hasn't had a quarterback, so maybe you give him another chance. So to just finally have the nail in the coffin, get him out of there, be like, nope, we're done. It really feels like the weird stuff with the Bijan being sick thing and kind of the weird decisions he was making over the last month of the season kind of did him in. But I'm just glad that he's no longer screwing over the Falcons, and then they finally do get a quarterback, and then suddenly they have a second quarterback, and then suddenly we have all these weapons with quarterbacks. The defense was starting to play really well at the end of last season. I think this can be a fun team. And Chris, you and I were talking about it, I think the last 2 years, about how the Atlanta Falcons, they can be a fun team. They can be a fun team, but he kept ruining it. And now finally we get to see, hopefully, I love Drake London. I know you guys do it as well. Kyle Pitts, all these guys that we've really liked.
Bijan.
Finally get unlocked. Yeah, exactly. And Kirk Cousins is playing the best football of his career before he went down. So adding that whole thing, it's going to be really fun. Just not having Arthur Smith there to be like, well, that's going to ruin it.
Yeah, I'll just throw mine out there, Chris, real fast, because it literally piggybacks off of Adam. Mine was Zach Robinson becoming the play caller, despite the fact that he doesn't actually have play calling experience beforehand, because the very minimum, I know he's running a 21st century offense with Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, and that in and of itself, with solid quarterback play at the bare minimum, with Kirk Cousins coming off the Achilles injury. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to get more excited about. Plus, if you look around, I don't know how many coaching hires, and Chris, we'll get to yours, I guess, in a second, but I don't know how many coaching hires are really that exciting. I was shocked this past year's carousel, how many defensive-minded guys got hired. I'm sorry, from a fantasy perspective, that's not going to move my boat. It's kind of just boiled down to that default.
No, I totally understand. And real quick, Dan, can you think of a better scenario than that Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith are together? There's a more perfect fit together where I just think that's destined for each other. But I agree with you 100%.
I don't want to watch play offense this year.
I agree, but this is defensive hire, but I think where you can counter those defensive hires is when you hire a good offensive mind. So I liked what Seattle did. Look, I like Pete Carroll. He's a great guy. No one necessarily had to lose his job. But hiring McDonald and bringing Grubb in, I think, was a fantastic move. Two things that stand out to me. Number one, thank God for some fresh blood. Some young guys who are fresh out of college, bring a different perspective. The NFL is full of retreads, and that's why a lot of times why we see offenses like we saw last year, where teams aren't scoring points because everybody knows what's coming. And they've seen the same things over and over and over again. I think what Seattle did is, bring a different edge to this team, and offensively, it's how you counter that defense. We have a guy a defensive-minded guy. You want to make sure you have a great hire, and I think Ryan Grubb's going to be a fantastic move for them in Seattle.
Yeah, I do. That was honestly going to be my second one that I was going to say, Chris, was Ryan Grubb, just because it's finally, to your point, it's finally something different. But, it's hard for me as a 49ers fan to give Seattle any credit, so I kind of had to go with the Falcons.
I totally understand that. So let's move on real quickly. Let's get to the draft. What's something that maybe happened during the draft time that got you super excited or got, looking forward to and just came salivating over? We'll start off at the end.
Yeah, for me, it was Ladd McConkey. I went back and forth on this. Obviously love Marvin Harrison to the Arizona Cardinals. Perfect for fantasy purposes in every sort of way. I love Rome Odunze for the long run with match up with Caleb Williams and even Malik Neighbors. I mean, if nothing else, I don't know who else besides him is getting the target share. So I did like all those things, but I wanted to go with somebody who wasn't one in the top three, but two really boomed his value with his landing spot. And that is Ladd McConkey. Now I've been on record. I do not like the Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh situation for Justin Herbert from a fantasy standpoint. I think from an NFL standpoint, it'll be great. It'll be fine, whatever. But from a fantasy standpoint, don't love it. Don't love the volume. However, because they had to get rid of Keenan Allen, because they had to get rid of Mike Williams, because we know Josh Palmer is just a dude, and we think Quentin Johnson might be a bust after year one because it looked pretty awful. Ladd McConkey easily comes in, I think in my mind, will prove to be the best receiver week one at training camp, and therefore have the biggest target share and be the go-to option. And there is room in his offense for the main pass catcher to be very good fantasy-wise. And then add in the fact that he's probably the best, or at least one of the best route runners coming out of the draft. And the fact that he blew everybody away with a surprising 4.3, 9.40 to prove that, no, he's got speed to go with his route running on top of it. We saw Zay Flowers do well. We saw Marquise Brown do well. Greg Roman has had these rookie wide receivers come in when they can be the featured guys and perform. So he's not afraid to play them like an Andy Reid is, which is one of the reasons I worry about Xavier Worthy, at least for his rookie season, because he doesn't typically have his guys come out and play well. Rasheed Rice, even it took him till halfway through the season become a regular starter and as good as he was. So I love this for Ladd McConkey of the draft. I think he had the biggest boom to solidify himself as a top 4 receiver from this draft and may even want to prove and be better than one of those big 3 depending upon how this shakes out.
I like it. I like it a lot. How about you, Adam?
Well, you guys know that I was a lot higher than consensus, definitely than you guys on Jermaine Burton. And I was so excited about the landing spot he ended up with, him going to Cincinnati, getting an early opportunity, as a rookie to be that third guy with T. Higgins, then potentially be able to take over that role and be that second receiver. I think that's the best opportunity for him, especially with, if he's going to be like a deep threat flanker type, to have someone like Jamar Chase, that's the X. There's no we're going to have to put you out of position. We're going to make you do things you're not good at. No, you can go play your spot. That's fine. That's open. You can do that. That's no big deal. I think it's a fantastic spot for him. I think it's a good fit for them. Really, I'd like their draft in general because all to them is another selection that I really, really like, another landing spot that I really, really like. So I think just Jermaine Burton's the big one, but the Bengals kind of getting my guys, I think was really cool. And I think, great job surrounding Joe Burrow with some weapons that I feel like are going to be pretty cheap.
Yeah, weapons are always important when you have a good quarterback. I think that's a nice, under radar move, maybe that people might have to remember from the draft. But Burton is definitely a sneaky good move. For myself, there's a lot of different things that happened during the draft, but I'm just going to kind of double down what I talked about before. Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy to Kansas City. I mean, we were sitting there looking at this guy, where could he go? What situations could he wind up in? How will we use him? I think all of us kind of shared our viewpoint when we had our shows about the receivers, the rookie receivers in this upcoming class that we liked. What our concern was with some of them, and Xavier Worthy, our concern was, is he going to get kind of not utilized in the right system? Is it coaching going to kind of stick him in a situation where he's just running, goes and clearing out people? Well, just like I talked to Randy about Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Like I said, it's not MVS. It's not Kadarius Toney. It's not Denard Robinson from a couple of years ago. It's not Mecole Hardman. It's actual good receivers with Patrick Mahomes to throw the ball. We think he's good with the shit he's been playing with. Imagine having that and Travis Kelce. So excited, and thank you for that.
Shout out MVS to the Buffalo Bills because we got to get super excited about that.
All right, that's going to be another one.
They found their Gabe Davis replacement. Keon
True.
Coleman will be allowed to not have to only play the X wide receiver. And Adams, you talked about that before. Is that being one of your big gripes? The X receiver not necessarily performing as well in Joe Brady's offense. The flanker is usually the more productive guy. Well, Keon Coleman could actually be the flanker now with Marquez Valdes-Scantling there. So, it always benefits somebody. See, from a fantasy perspective, there's always a silver lining.
Well, to that point, Dan, so that's going to move us to our next, part of our segment where we ask you to make it make sense.
It's simple mathematics. Check it out.
I
There
like
you
it.
go. Makes sense.
Make it make sense. So we're going to have a chance for whether we're going to build the case for something that happened this offseason that we think should continue, or that we are able to shout out and we want to support, or we're going to destroy something that happened regarding this offseason where we're just like, no way, not on our watch, and we need to stop this and end it now. So we're going to start off with you, Dan.
All right. I'm ready for this. I just dropped this article actually on the Fantasy Football Advice Network. Go check it out. Team profiles fantasy football on the Miami Dolphins. And in that, I said, you got to make it make sense as to why Devon Achane is RB9 in his ADP, especially when you add in the fact that Raheem Mostert right now ADP is RB28. Look, Devon Achane in a few games was electrifying. I get it. It's fun to watch. I'm a Madden player. I'm a fantasy football player. I found it exciting to watch him. I am not trying to have this come off to be a hater person on Devon Achane, but there has to be a reality check here at some point. We're talking about a guy who averages 12 opportunities per game. His size was an issue, hence why he only played 11 games last season, was hurt going into the year, and then came out of the year missing 6 more games on top of it. Now, all of a sudden, we saw him. What happens when he doesn't hit on those 12 opportunities? Yes, in the beginning of the season, when they played the Denver Broncos and they're catching everybody off guard in the months of September and October, where we know the Miami Dolphins offense is at its best, he was RB4 overall on a per-game basis. Great. Fantastic. It's metrics that aren't sustainable. No running back in the history of any NFL is ever going to sustain a 7.7 yards per carry. No running back in the NFL is ever going to sustain a 7.8% touchdown rate. It's unreasonable to expect that week in and week out. And then what happened when he got back from his injury from weeks 12 through 18? He dived back down to being more of an RB19. I'm not saying he's not a good player. He is, but you cannot draft him as an RB9. One, it's too risky that he'll be available enough at the time to give you back return on that investment. And we've seen now what happens. He's more of a boom bust, low end RB2 when he doesn't hit. That's the issue. That's his real value. There's no way I'm going to draft Devon Achane ahead of Raheem Mostert when Mostert's going to be the lead back on his own team. It's going to be more consistent from week to week. I love Devon Achane, but you're setting yourself up from failure if you're going to draft him at his ceiling at RB9. So make that make sense. It needs to have a reality check.
I like it. Dan's destroying the case for taking Achane too early. There's no way you should be doing it. Adam, how about you?
I cannot stand the argument on Twitter. I see it in all fantasy football spaces, but it drives me the most insane on Twitter that in dynasty rookie drafts, you need to, hey, if Bo Nix is falling out of the first, you got to go get him. It's a quarterback. There's, upside of the quarterback position. It matters more than all the other positions. I agree with those things, and I can accept that argument for why you would take like a Caleb over a Marvin. Sure. Fair, because the upside, if he's an elite quarterback, that is more impactful than an elite receiver. Willing to give you that one. Okay. Even for some of these other quarterbacks, I'm willing to accept it. For last year, for taking your swing on Richardson early, sure, I can get it. Mobile quarterbacks, really valuable. Dan, we're talking about how hard it is for a pocket passer, first of all, to provide fantasy value. And then we're talking about one who does not throw deep, so have fun with your touchdowns, for one who it just isn't very aggressive. He has some mobility, I guess, but like rollout mobility, not running for touchdowns mobility. In this offense last year, we saw, like, sure, Russell Wilson had okay fantasy numbers. That's great and all. But it was very clear that he was a game manager, game in and game out. Like, this wasn't like a let's unleash this quarterback. This is a let the run game and defense win and just don't mess it up for me. And then I keep seeing the argument to come back with, like, oh, you don't know quarterback eval is as good as Sean Payton. You know, Drew Brees did great when people weren't believing in him. I'm sorry. Every single quarterback outside of, I guess, if you want to give him Taysom Hill, I'm willing to give him Taysom Hill. Every single quarterback that succeeded under Sean Payton, he signed or traded for from outside his building. He has not drafted quarterbacks to save his life. Like, I'm sorry.
You don't like Grayson, Sean Mannion?
Ian Book was on a different practice squad like the next year. Like, I pretending he's some great quarterback evaluator is asinine to me. Like, if you want to give him he's a great offensive mind, offensive coordinator, sure. Like, all of those things, 100%. He knows way more than me. But I'm sorry. He has done nothing in the draft specifically for me to think, oh yeah, he's infallible in his QB decision making in the draft for rookie quarterbacks, for what it takes to get from college to the next level. If you want to tell me, okay, cool, I've seen NFL film on this guy, I know what I can do with him. Yeah, he can do that. But I've never seen him go, I see this guy's college film, I know how that translates to the NFL. Never seen it. I don't think that's a valid argument to me. I can't stand it. Look, if Bo Nix is falling to the mid to late second, sure. Like, at that point, I'm willing to take it. You have a fill-in quarterback. But I don't think that often in his NFL career, Bo Nix is going to be more than QB 24, which is what I need to care in Dynasty for me personally.
Dude, we have taken so many shots as Sean Payton and Bo Nix. This episode, I absolutely love it. Love it.
Hey, they deserve them. I think it is what it is. You know, and I think you guys bring up both good points about some of the quarterback plays. Like, you're looking at what we're seeing from these teams, and it's just, I don't know. So for me, one of the things I'm struggling with, and just I need to make sense, it doesn't make sense, is I'm not as big as Malik Neighbors fan as everybody else is, but this narrative that he's going to be like one of the best fantasy receivers to have rookie-wise, or one of these guys that you want to have right now, that's going to be, you can bet for rookie of the year. Malik Neighbors, Dan, how many touchdowns did Daniel Jones throw? You said 2 years ago? I believe it was 15. How is he going to get to these numbers? I look at an offense that does not push the ball down the field, does not have a propensity to have offensive capability outside their quarterback being mobile. They lost Saquon Barkley. So I had to see this offense do anything. I know this with the draft capital. I know this idea, well, he could be Stephon Diggs. Josh Allen was throwing the ball Stephon Diggs, not Daniel Jones. So I got to see how in the world this is going to pan out. People have this love from Malik Neighbors and what he's going to be able to do and what he's going to do, debate with Marvin Harrison this year. It is no debate in my book. I'm sorry. Malik Neighbors might be a decent receiver overall, but you ain't going to be somebody you need to have on your fantasy team this year.
Well, Chris, I'm with you on that. I'm literally writing about it. I mentioned Malik Neighbors before. Yes, the target share is going to be there. He's going to have a floor. But right now, his ADP has him going somewhere like borderline top 20. And I'm with you. I just got off, the beginning of this episode talking about how I had to get it out of my system, but what happened to Garrett Wilson, who I was so high on last year? And Garrett Wilson, it wasn't a lack of volume that was the issue. Again, fourth in targets, 100 receptions for the season. The problem was 6.2 yards per target, and the problem was 3 touchdowns on the season. It's very conceivable that Malik Neighbors could wind up in a very, very similar situation. And Adam, you and I both comped Malik Neighbors, oddly enough, to Garrett Wilson to begin with. So, yeah, unless you're going to suddenly get better quarterback play out of Daniel Jones, I don't see the efficiency. I don't see the touchdowns. The volume might be there, but when the efficiency is that piss poor, sometimes it doesn't actually matter. Do I think he has a floor as a wide receiver 3? That territory? Yeah, 100%. But right now, his ADP is pushing him as a top 20 wide receiver. So I will lay that out for you as a good example as to why I think you are correct as far as the hype being too much in that direction.
Yeah, I think, Stan, and I think Malik Neighbors, like I said, just cool down the Jets. I'm not betting on him. But speaking of bets, this is our part of our section of the making sense. We can't make dollars if we don't make sense, Dan. So let's give some people some of our bets, or In this case, our big balls bets where we put rather our reputations or actual money on the line that we're looking for something that pays out well, or that we can sit and puff our chest out and say, told you so.
All right, Chris. Well, I'm going to kind of hijack this segment from you just a little bit because I want to give a shout out to Underdog, sponsors of today's show, sponsors of all of our shows. Promo code FF Advice. You sign up first deposit up to $250 in cash, a bonus, and you get a half-point free pick'em special pick. So make sure you go ahead and check out Underdog Fantasy as soon as you can. And all these bets, I got 5 bets for you. I'm going to roll through them real quick. They're all on Underdog. Caleb Williams, I got him on Underdog over 3,550 and a half passing yards. He's got DJ Moore. He's got Keenan Allen. He's got Rome Odunze. He's got Cole Kmet. He's got DeAndre Swift out of the backfield. Every weapon you could possibly need at every situation, and you should be able to expect at least 570 pass attempts out of a Shane Waldron type offense. That's what he's been at the past 2 seasons. This will be a pass-first team. Even if Caleb Williams comes in at a first-round rookie quarterback average of 6.5 yards per pass attempt and isn't any better than that, which has been the baseline since 2020, it should put him at 3,700 yards passing. So Caleb Williams higher than 3,550 yards passing this season. Let's stick with the quarterbacks. Let's go with Patrick Mahomes. Over 34 and a half passing touchdowns this year. Chris, you mentioned earlier, Hollywood Brown, the addition of him, drafting Xavier Worthy. At the very least, this should not only upgrade the receiving room, but upgrade their ability to hit the big play, which is what was lacking severely last year. We'll see about what happens to Rashee Rice. That much is true, but he's only been under that mark, Patrick Mahomes, that is, twice in his entire career. Yes, once was last season. I expect him to bounce back this year. So higher than 34 and a half passing touchdowns. Let's stay with the Kansas City Chiefs. Xavier Worthy over under 800 and a half receiving yards. I have the under on this one. Look, no matter what happens with Rashee Rice, maybe it does open the door for Xavier Worthy to have earlier playing time than we would expect normally out of a rookie wide receiver in Andy Reid-led offense. But again, I bring this back to this point. Rashee Rice was not a full-time starter until the second half of the season in a situation in which the Chiefs had no wide receivers outside of Travis Kelce. We're talking Marquez Valdes-Scantling, McCole Hardman, any other crap they want to throw out there. And it still took half the year for Rashee Rice to be blessed with the ability to be the starting receiver in the second half of the year. I don't think Xavier Worthy is going to beat that mark, and therefore I think he's going to be under the 800 and a half receiving yards mark this season. Let's kick this over to Lamar Jackson. Over 770 rushing yards this year. Nothing about Lamar Jackson's game has changed with Todd Monken taking over the offensive coordinator. We saw that last season. He's only been under the 770 mark twice in his career. 767 in 2022, 764 in 2021. The thing those seasons had in common, he only played 12 games. So basically, you're telling me as long as Lamar Jackson plays 13 games of the year, he's going to hit the over on 770 and a half rushing yards. So I like that one. And to cap it all off, to get it back to my player who I like the most in free agency, Mr. Derrick Henry, higher than only 999 yards right now. If he just goes over 1,000, that's all we're talking about. Yes, I have the over on 1,000. The last time he was under that mark was 2021 when he only played 8 games, and he wasn't that far under the mark, by the way. He had one of the worst offensive lines in his career last season, still went over 1,100 yards. The Ravens don't have any significant competition. Gus Edwards, splitting carries, still had 800 yards last season and got injured. Derrick Henry over basically 1,000 yards, 999 and a half rushing yards. I'm all about that for Derrick Henry. And that is your Underdog higher over-unders for you.
I love it. I love it, Dan. And while you're going, why don't you take us out, out of the show for today? I had a great time. So what do we have to look forward to? And, what's everybody doing?
100%. So next week we'll be back. Adam's going to be leading that episode, so we'll see what he has stored up. We'll be back here at the Fantasy Football Advice Network at FF Advice Network on YouTube. We'll be live 9:30 next Wednesday night, as we always are. Make sure you check us out on social media at OP Domination FF. Follow me at Dan Mater FF. Follow Adam LaRue at Adam, you got to change your thing because it gets me all backwards. You just say it for the people for me.
Yeah, just at LaRue Adam again. Literally just switch if you're watching, and you should be watching because it's a great show to watch. Switch last name, first name, and you're there. Just drop the apostrophe. You're like so good. Otherwise, just get over on the Fantasy Football Advice Network, and we can chat over there. It's always a great place.
Yeah, 100%. I've been told there might be a new look to the website coming soon. Spoiler alert. So we'll see coming up in the next couple of weeks. Can't wait for that. But always hit us up on the Fantasy Football Advice Network on social media, the website, and on YouTube. Download us on your favorite podcast app. Operation Domination is all you got to search for. And make sure you subscribe so you always get notified whenever we have new content available to you. Guys, we'll be talking to you next week, 9:30 on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Hey there, I'm proud to say that Underdog Fantasy is the newest sponsor of our show, and it's my favorite place to play fantasy games. No waivers, no trades, no lineup settings, just best ball for season-long drafters all year long. And you gotta check out Pick'em. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players. You can choose whether they go higher or lower on those stats, and if you can pick 5 in a row, you can win 20 times your money. Sound like fun? Well, guess what? You can sign up with promo code FFAdvice today to claim your special pick, plus a first-time deposit offer up to $250 in bonus cash. I cannot wait to see your entries.